Judges chapter 3 is where we are at today. And we are continuing our study through the book of Judges and have covered the first couple chapters, of course. If you are just coming in brand new, I will give you a little bit of background as we get into it, because if not, it could be quite confusing as to why God's doing what he's doing, but we'll see that in the first verse, actually. So Judges chapter 3 is where we are. And for those of you that take notes, note takers, I've got a couple of, so I got some notes up on the screen. And what I've done is I've broken the chapter up into two main sections, two main divisions. The first being verses 1 to 6, which is judgment. And then the second main division, which is Judges, verses 7 to 31. Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times in the first couple of chapters, but I'll mention it again here. The name Judges does not mean that these are judges that are associated with a court of law. You know, like we have judges that dress in black robes and have a gavel and make judgments on cases. The word judges, the way that it's used in this book, it is referring to heroes. Heroes that were used by God in a very specific time to really save God's people. So that's what the word judges here means, okay? But we'll see judgment in verses 1 to 6. Not a fun way to start out your Sunday morning service, right? But it's in there, and so we're going to cover it, and then we will see the judges beginning at verse 7, and we will see the first of we will see the first three judges in the book of Judges. We'll meet the first three today, and they're it's quite extraordinary. Let's pick it up in verse 1, where we find the judgment in verses 1 to 6. And it says in verse 1, "Now these are the nations which the Lord left, that he might test Israel by them, that is, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan." Now, again, some explanation needed there, okay? Let me back up a little bit. In Judges chapter 2, which we covered last week, I'm going to read the first three verses. You can turn back a chapter if you want, or you can just sit and listen and follow along. In Judges chapter 2, it starts this way. Verse 1, "Then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I led you up from Egypt and brought you to the land of which I swore to your fathers." So this is God speaking, saying, I saved you from Egypt. "And I said, I will never break my agreement, my covenant with you." So God made a promise. He's going to hold that promise. Verse 2, "He also told them, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars." So he told them also, do not make any agreements or partnerships with the people that are living in the land now. You've got to tear down, you've got to destroy their altars. Their altars were made for worship to other gods, false gods, and God did not want them having any part in that. So it says at the end of verse 2, "But you have not obeyed my voice." If they hadn't obeyed his voice, that means very simply they were disobedient to God. And then he asked the question, why have you done this? Verse 3, "Therefore I also said," here's something else that God said. Now the word therefore means because you were disobedient, here's another thing that I'm saying. "I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare to you." So what God is telling them there in chapter 2, verse 3 is, because you were disobedient to me and did not remove these people from the land, God says, I'm not removing them. I'm going to leave them there, and they are going to be problematic for you. Now, I need to explain very briefly, because some of us might go, oh man, that's not right. I mean, I thought God, helped us out all the time. What's the problem? Well, there was an agreement made between God and his people. God said, I'm going to take you to the new land. There are people that are living there, but the people that are living there are wicked people. These were not like the Cleavers, from the old Leave It to Beaver show, like super nice family. These were people who were, as part of their worship, were willing to sacrifice their own babies. They would take them and burn them alive as part of their worship. They also had all sorts of sexual practices that were involved with their worship. So these were not nice people that, oh, these poor people. No, these were wicked people that God was judging. And what he did was he told his people, I'm taking you there, and I'm going to go in first, and I'm going to defeat these people, but you need to follow behind, and you will clean up the rest of it. You'll clean up the mess, basically. But God said, I'll do the work. You just have to go in, and by faith, you chase the rest of the people out. I'll be with you. We'll do this. Well, what he's indicating in chapter 2, verse 3 is that you didn't drive them out, so I'm going to leave them there. Now, this is a very, very important biblical principle here, something that you and I need to understand. God gets blamed for a lot of things that he has never done. There was just an accident, right? An airplane, a helicopter flew into an airplane. Many of you may have seen that. Was that God's fault? People will immediately blame those things on God. Oh, that was God's fault. Several years ago, we had the planes that flew into the towers in New York on 9/11. There were lots of people blaming God for that. Oh, God, God did that. And it is true that God could stop these things. Why doesn't he? I don't know. I do not know. I'm a pastor. I've been teaching the Bible for a long time, but I do not understand all of the things that God does or doesn't do. I don't know. But what I do know is God didn't make that helicopter fly into the airplane. He didn't make those airplanes fly into the towers. He didn't make that happen. He didn't do that. Those were people. Those were human beings. One done purposely, the other we believe done accidentally, but those were people. It's important that you and I understand this. Here's what we're getting at, okay? It's important that you and I understand that sometimes we suffer. Everybody suffers at different times. Oftentimes, suffering is it's a natural part of the world that we live in. This world involves sorrow and sickness and even death. And so sometimes your grandmother might be diagnosed with cancer, or your dad might get in a car wreck, or your best friend might die in a car crash. Those are things that naturally occur in this world because of the world that we live in. Again, this is not an infinite world. This is a finite world. It's short. It ends. There's an end to it. And there's naturally these things that happen. And so sometimes we are experiencing hardships just as a result of natural things, natural results that happen in this world. But then there are times when you and I are experiencing hardships as a result of our choices. You may have a friend say, no, don't hook up with that person, that guy or that girl, man, they're bad news. Yeah, I know they look cute or whatever, and but I'm telling you, man, that person is bad news. And you may say, forget that, I'm gonna change this person, I'm gonna make them into a nice person or whatever. And then you may decide to go ahead and start dating that individual, and then find out afterwards that that was a horrible choice. But it was your choice. You made that choice. You knew about the possibilities and the consequences, and so then you suffer the consequences. That's not God's fault. That's a choice that you made. And the consequences come, and you're going to suffer through those consequences. And so there are times when we sin against God, and then we experience the consequences. That's not God's fault. If Dad tells you, you need to make sure that you vacuum the rugs, and then you don't do it, and you try to blame it on your sister or your brother. Oh, but then, I was going to, but then, my brother, he called me over to play Xbox with him. And so he didn't, he kept me from cleaning. That's not going to fly. That was your decision. That was your choice. That's what you did. And so then you will have to suffer the consequences. So it's important, an important biblical principle that when we sin, there are consequences, and we will suffer those consequences. That doesn't make God unholy. It doesn't make him unjust. It does not make him unloving. In fact, just the opposite is true. Because we've sinned against him, he is holy when he disciplines us. He is just when he disciplines us. He is loving when he disciplines us. So that's important, that we not blame God for choices that we've made and then are suffering the consequences. God gets blamed for so many things, man. Poor guy. Poor guy. He gets blamed for things that he did not even do. Things that we did that we're suffering for, but then we want to blame it on someone else. We're always quick to blame. We love to throw the blame on somebody. Oh, it was their fault. They made me do it. He made me do it. She made me do it. Whatever. It was the dog's fault. It was the neighbor's fault. It was my teacher's fault that I got an F in the class. We always want to blame somebody else. We need to learn how to take the blame. The children of Israel here, verse 1. These are the nations which the Lord left. The only reason the Lord left these people, the nations in that land, was because the children of Israel had left them in the land first. They had done that out of disobedience to the Lord. So then God said in Judges chapter 2, if you're not leaving them, you're not getting rid of them, I'm not getting rid of them either. And you can live with the consequences. That doesn't mean that God hated the people, that he took his hands off. That's part of his disciplining process. So it says in verse 1 that he left them there. The reason God did it was not out of disobedience like the people. The reason God left them was that he might test Israel by them. That is, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan. Now, the phrase, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan, that applies to the younger generation. Now, do you know anybody from the younger generation? Oftentimes, the younger generation does not like to pay attention to the older generation. You're too old, Dad. You don't understand. Mom, you're too old. You don't know about sin. You're so old that, there was not even sin when you were a little kid. We foolishly think that the older generation, they don't know what they're talking about. No, I know I'm not talking about any of you lovely young people in here. I know that all of you go, no, man, you know what? I love the older generation. I love history. I love to learn all those things. I love to learn from the past. I know that all of you feel that way because you're all smart. You're all wise. You wouldn't ever think to yourself, oh, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, you don't know what you're talking about, right? But there are young people out there that think that way. Like, oh, you're old, you don't know nothing. Well, that's what he's referring to in verse 1. All who had not known any of the wars in Canaan, that is indicating a younger generation who had not experienced the difficulties of war going into the land and trying to take the land. They didn't understand. They had it easy. They grew up, man, in a life of ease. And they were like, we don't know nothing. We don't care about any of that stuff. So he's going to test them. Verse 2 says, this was only so that the generations of the children of Israel might be taught to know war, at least those who had not formerly known it. So they were going to experience difficulties. That's what those verses mean. Now he tells us here in verse 3 who these nations are that are left in the land, namely 5 lords of the Philistines. So the Philistines. Now you go 5 lords, that's 5 rulers of the Philistines. And we go, that doesn't sound, 5 rulers, that doesn't sound like much. The Philistines will forever be problematic for the children of Israel. As long as you are in this class, this might be the first day of your freshman year. I know it's not, but if you're a freshman right now and you're like, man, I'm going to be here for 4 years. I got to listen to this stuff for 4 years. As long as you and I are here studying the Bible together on Sunday mornings, you're going to hear about the Philistines. They are always going to be problematic. Why? Because the children of Israel disobeyed God and didn't kick him out. 5 lords of the Philistines in verse 3, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites who dwelt in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon to the entrance of Hamath. So the author here tells us who the nations are and where they were, and these are the ones that are going to be problematic. And then it says in verse 4, it tells us about this judgment. Tells us here, now this is the second time that it's going to tell us. Can we get it up there? Let's see. Maybe the back can help me. I don't know if I did that or they did, but it's up there. There's a test mentioned in verse 1 and a test mentioned in verse 4. Let's read verse 4. And they were left, that he, that's God, might test Israel by them. So he's going to God is going to use these enemies to put his own people to the test, to know whether they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he had commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So he's going to use them to test his people to see if his people will obey him or if they'll fall into sin. They'll choose sin. Will they choose God or will they choose sin? Now, as you can imagine in verses 5 and 6, they failed the test. Some people are good test takers, and then there are some people who are not. Maybe it's the pressure, the thinking, whatever it is, but some of you just don't do well on tests. And you might do fantastic in the class. Maybe you're a great student, hardworking, you get good grades. And then when it comes to the test, man, it's just like crash and burn. And maybe, mom and dad get mad at you, or your teacher looks at you like, what's wrong with you or whatever. And you're frustrated, like, I don't know what's going on. Some people just are not good at taking tests. Others are, naturally, whatever. But here you have a group of people who failed the test that God was giving them. Look what it says in verse 5. Thus the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amaroites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Termites, the Outsites. And they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods, little g. That indicates for us that they failed the test. They were supposed to remain obedient to God, worshiping God only, but now we see them, they're intermarrying, and then they begin to worship the other gods. There's something funny that happens when you marry somebody. You change. And you begin to do things like the person that you married. But they likewise will begin to do things like the person they married, like you. You begin to rub off on one another. I mean, that oftentimes even happens in the courting or dating portion of the relationship. You start to, I never liked, I never liked Italian food, but man, the person that I'm with just loves Italian food, and now I love Italian food. And you find yourself doing all kinds of crazy things. You might find yourself, like some of you guys, man, you might even find yourself, all of a sudden, you like Hallmark movies. Watch out. You're like, man, I don't know, what's the deal with these Hallmark movies, and then pretty soon you're like into it. Like, wait, what did John say? Or what did she say? You're just into it. Like, whatever. You find yourself doing all kinds of crazy things. Here, in verse 6, they took the daughters from these other peoples to be their wives, but then they gave their daughters to their sons. They began to intermarry. And what happened as a result of that? Now, they disobeyed. They didn't kick the people out, so the people are still living there. Now they begin to hook up and begin to intermarry. Once that happened, what happened was God's people forsook him and started worshiping the false gods. Why? Why would they do that? It's strange. It's strange what happens. Sometimes you will see a Christian begin to date somebody that's not a Christian. And then after a little while, you might be like, you know what? Man, I haven't seen her at church in a little while. Where's she been? I wonder, man. And then all of a sudden you find out, she started dating somebody, and she's doing, she's gone. Or the guy, he hooked up with this person, and now I don't know, they're gone. I'm going to explain to you why that happens, why it seems so easy. If I were to bring this chair up here, or if I were to stand on this cajon right now, I'm not going to do that because I got these fancy shoes on and I might slip off, and it would be so embarrassing. Get it on video, and you might see me on your Instagram feed. But if I were to stand up here, and if I were to pull someone, man, if I was to take Amanda, I said, Amanda, come up here. Chandis, one of the smaller people in the room. And as you can tell, I'm so buff, But if I were to be up here, I'm not very strong. But if I were to stand up here, I'm a bigger guy. They're smaller young ladies, and we were to grasp hands and try to pull each other. I'm going to try and pull her up. She's going to try and pull me down. It's going to be easier, actually, for her to pull me down off of that cajon. you might look at Candace or, look at Amanda and you go, oh, yeah, but they're small. There's no way. No, but you see, they have gravity on their side. They're pulling down on me. It's always going to be harder for me to pull somebody up. Same thing here in verse 6. Why would they just forsake God and get married and then start worshiping their gods? Because that's the way that gravity was going. It was pulling downward. New Year's Eve, 2023, going into 2024. Where was I? Partying it up, right? Nah. I was in my attic. Why was I in my attic? I was in my attic because it was raining that night. You don't believe me? You go back and check. This is a true story. And I was in my attic and it was raining that night. And wouldn't you know, New Year's Eve, trying to relax, enjoy the evening, whatever. And we sprung a leak, man. We had a leak in our roof. And so now I'm trying to find the leak. Water's wonderful. You can heat it up and wash yourself. Feels so good. Take a hot shower. Wash your hair, brush your teeth. Water's wonderful. Flush stuff down the toilet that needs to be flushed. Right? Water your yard. Water, give water to your dogs, whatever. Make lemonade with it, whatever. If it's hot, jump in some cold water, in the pool or the lake or whatever. It's wonderful. But when water is leaking into your house, then it's from Satan. Then you're like, man, this is satanic, right? And there's something frustrating, so frustrating about water. Water travels. Did you know that? So you get a leak over here and you go, oh yeah, I can see the leak, and there's, okay, yep, I'm going to get up inside there. I'm going to see where it's coming from so I can, get up on the roof and patch it up. Done that lots of times over the years. But what can happen is you go, oh, there's a leak right there, and you get up there inside the attic, and then you realize, oh, wait, no, it's not dripping from the water's there, but all of a sudden you find out it came from back there at the other end of the room, and it traveled down here, and then and it traveled all over the place. And that is because water is going to travel the easiest path, the path of the least resistance. That's how sin works. It's always going to be easier to sin. Disobedience is easier than being obedient to the Lord. Now, not in the end, it doesn't work out that way. But in the moment, it's like, I can deny my flesh and not give in to this sin, which is really hard. Or I could just give in, like, let's go. And we oftentimes go with whatever's easiest. That's what happened here in verse 6. They disobeyed God, and they went with whatever was easiest. That's what sin does. We're going to travel the path of least resistance. So they failed their test. Now beginning in verse 7, we meet the first 3 judges of all the judges that we will read about here in the book of Judges. Okay? The first 3. And I told you, I think it was last week, it might have been 2 weeks ago, I told you the book of Judges is rated R. For violence. And today, you're going to see it. We're going to meet 3 judges. The first of those judges is Othniel, verses 7 through 11. Now, Othniel, we first read about Othniel back in Joshua chapter 15. But then we read about him again in Judges chapter 1. Let's find out. Verse 7. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. The Baals and Asherahs were names of their gods. Asherahs were goddesses. So notice, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's called disobedience. Okay? Verse 8, we go from disobedience to discipline. Look at verse 8. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. For 8 long years, they were enslaved to him. Well, it goes from disobedience in verse 7, discipline in verse 8, deliverance in verse 9. When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So Caleb, you've heard of Caleb before, old man, loved God, full of faith. He had a younger brother named Kenaz, And then so Othniel ended up being the son-in-law of Caleb. So he's a good. This is a good family, okay. And so God used Othniel to lead his people, deliver his people from that enslavement to Cushan Rishathaim. But then it says in verse 11, so the land had rest for 40 years. That means for 40 years they lived in peace. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Now there's a direct relation there. As long as the judge, in this case Othniel, I said in this case, Othniel, in this case, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, as long as he lived, the people were obedient. Right? Now, let me explain something to you. I need to explain it to you because I know that you don't understand this because you've never done this before in your life. But some people, when their parents leave the house, they go wild. You know, break stuff, do things that they're not supposed to, you know, eat things that they shouldn't be eating, you know. Some people do that. When the leader is gone, right? When they, what do they say? When the cat's away, the mice will play. I know none of you would ever do that, right? But some people do that. Well, here, as long as Othniel was around, they were obedient. But once he died, look what happens in verse 12. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's what happens. So we move now, in verse 12, we move to this man named Ehud. You're going to love this guy. This is one of my all-time favorite stories in the Bible. I love this story. Let's read about Ehud. Now, again, obviously it starts with disobedience, verse 12. That's the cycle. Disobedience, discipline, deliverance. We're going to see it now. We're going to see it all through the book of Judges. Verse 12, and the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon. He was the king of Moab. So God used this heathen king against his own people Israel because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. So there it is. Disobedience brings discipline. Let's look at the discipline in verses 13 and 14. Then he gathered to himself the people of Ammon and Amalek. Okay, so Eglon, he goes and gets these people together. They went and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of Palms. Okay, which we believe to be Palm Springs, which is about an hour. No, I'm just kidding. No, Jericho is what they believe. They believe that Jericho was called the city of Palms. Okay, so the children of Israel served Eglon, king of Moab, 18 years. So here they go again. Disobedience. God uses the heathen kings to discipline his own people. Now they're caught in slavery, or you know they're subject to Eglon for 18 years. 18 years. What comes after disobedience? Discipline. What comes after discipline? Deliverance. Here we go. Verse 15. But when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them. That's the judge. Ehud, the son of Gerah, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. Watch out. Any southpaws in here? Anybody? Also, I shouldn't like this. Southpaws? Yes. We got two of them. Two of them. That's it. I've heard, as I understand it, there's only 10% of the population are left-handed. So the rest of us are normal. Just kidding. Left-handed people is a very small percentage. And here we have just two people in the class, in the room. Just two people. This man was left-handed, right? Here we go. This one for the left-handers, man. Okay? We don't need Rocky anymore. Now we got, Ehud. Here we go. Now, Ehud, in verse 16, made himself a dagger. Watch out. What are we talking about here? It was double-edged. That means that it was sharp on both sides. Sometimes you'll see a knife and it's sharp on one end, on one side, but on the top it's just flat. This was, it was sharp on both ends. So Ehud made himself a dagger. It was double-edged and a cubit in length. A cubit in length was 18 inches, or about the distance between your elbow and your fingertips. So he had a dagger about that long. Okay? And it says in verse 16, he fastened it under his clothes on his right thigh. Now you're like, what? Why are we talking about men's thighs and what's going on in this class? What are we talking about here? What's going on? Okay? Well, it says in verse 17, so he brought the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, a tribute would be money that they would bring to Eglon. And they would have to bring that to him because he had defeated them and now they're his subjects. Okay? So it says here in verse 16. Now pay attention. I'm reading this. I didn't make this up. It's in your Bible too. Verse 17. So he brought the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. The Bible's got no chill, right? It's just like, it's a fat man, you know. It's 30 minutes already. We got to get you guys out of here as fast as we can, but you got to hear this story. This is crazy. Verse 18. Now, and when he had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who had carried the tribute. Okay, so here's the scene. I'm going to move through it quickly. Ehud comes in with this money, but he's got other people carrying the money, probably a treasure chest or something. So they carry it in. Eglon says, hey, Ehud says, Eglon, here's your tribute. And the guys bring the chest in, and then he sends those guys away. He goes, hey, okay, you guys get out of here. Verse 19. But he himself turned back from the stone images that were at Gilgal. So he was leaving too, and then he turned around and he came back and he tells the king, I have a secret message for you, O king. And what did the king say at the end of verse 19? Keep silent. And all who attended him went out from him. You know what it's like. Have you ever gotten mail? I know it's a rare thing nowadays, but if you ever get mail at your, like in your mailbox, that is so exciting because nobody sends mail anymore. And you might get a letter or a postcard or something, and you know what happens, right? Your brother or your sister, mom or dad come over like, oh, what'd you get? And what do? Nah, this is not for you. This is for me. And you know, you take it into your room and open it up, or they want to know what's in it. No, it's none of your business. That's Eglon. Ehud comes back and he goes, oh, by the way, I've got a secret message for you. And Eglon's like, oh, and he goes, everybody get out of here. Leave us alone. He's so excited to get this secret message. So it says in verse 20, so Ehud came to him. Now he was sitting upstairs in his cool private chamber. It's probably hot outside and he had this special room where he stayed cool. Then Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. So he arose from his seat. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the dagger from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly. Even the hilt went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the dagger out of his belly, and his entrails came out. You're like, wait, what did we just read? I wish that I could be with you in a little bit when you and your family are sitting down to eat lunch, and your mom says, hey, so what'd you guys learn today in class? Mom, let me tell you. There was this fat guy, and his guts spilled out. What happened? Ehud, when he got his chance, the king said, come and tell me. He gets up, he reaches into his clothing. I don't know exactly how he did it, but he took the dagger. He had the dagger secretly strapped to his left leg, to his right leg. So with his left hand, he's left-handed. He pulls that dagger out, sticks it in the king's belly, so far that the hilt went in. Some of you may not know what a hilt is. When you have a knife, a dagger like this, or picture a sword, you've got a handle, and then you've got the blade. Well, in between the handle and the blade, there's usually a metal piece in between that goes across. That's a hilt. It keeps your hand from sliding, and then you cut your own hand. He pushed this knife, this dagger, so hard into Eglon's belly that not only did the blade go in, but even the hilt pushed all the way in. And then the man's body, his own belly, swallowed up the knife. And it did so much damage that in the process, his entrails fell out. What are his entrails? Those are his, if you were in Scotland, you would say his intestines. His intestines spilled out. This man stuck that dagger so far up his belly, swallowed the whole knife, and made such a bad wound that all of his guts spilled out right there. And the man died. Insane in the membrane. Wow. Wow. What? Now, most likely what happened was that when Ehud came and said, hey, I got a secret message, they looked at him and they go, oh, he doesn't have a sword or a weapon. He didn't have his weapon showing because he had it strapped to his leg, man, incognito, man. He was hiding it. And they may have even patted him down, checking for a blade. But if you're a right-handed individual, you keep your blade over on this side and you pull it out across your body. You wouldn't keep it here because then you're trying to fumble with it, get it out, it's awkward. So you keep it over, you pull it out, okay, I'm ready to go. But they looked at him, they go, oh, okay, he doesn't have nothing. They didn't know he was left-handed. They didn't know the man was left-handed. And he had a dagger that they never even detected. So he was able to get in, pull that dagger out, and say, man, I got something for you, Eglon. Boom! Stuck this dude, prison style. Just stuck the whole thing in there and just left it in there. Just left it in there. The man got shanked. And it says in verse 23, then Ehud went out through the porch. So that means he went out another way. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. It's not over yet. And when he had gone out, Eglon's servants came to look. And to their surprise, the doors of the upper room were locked. So they said, he is probably attending to his needs in the cool chamber. That sounds so nice, doesn't it? You know what they mean by that? They said he's probably on the toilet. He locked the doors so that he could do his thing and go to the bathroom in there. Because they didn't have a bathroom like, you go to the bathroom and they just have a pot and he would be able to sit on that and just go to the bathroom. So they went, oh, it's locked. He must want privacy. He's probably going to go to the bathroom. Like, leave him alone, And so in verse 25, so they waited till they were embarrassed. It was too long. They're like, even if the man was constipated, this is taking too long. This is unnatural. And still in verse 25, and still he had not opened the doors of the upper room. Therefore they took the key and opened them. And there was their master fallen dead on the floor. But Ehud had escaped while they delayed, and passed beyond the stone images and escaped to Serah. And it happened when he arrived that he blew the trumpet in the mountains of Ephraim, and the children of Israel went down with him from the mountains, and he led them. Then he said to them, important part here. Then he said to them, follow me, for the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. Who did he give glory to? God. He didn't say, man, you should have seen how I knifed that sucker. You should have seen, oh, let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you how smart I was. I'm left-handed. He didn't do any of that. He said, the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. Let's go get them. So they went down after him, seized the fords of the Jordan, because there were no Chevys at that time, leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. The fords, that's a crossing point. There may have been little bridges, or the river Jordan was low, and so that's where people would cross. They placed themselves there so that no reinforcements could come. They wouldn't let anybody across. And in verse 29, and at that time they killed about 10,000 men of Moab, all stout men of valor. That means that these were bad dudes. Not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. And then, poor Shamgar. Shamgar gets one verse, man. But he's got a pretty cool story. Shamgar in verse 31. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel. 600 men. Well, what's an ox goad? What is an ox goad? An ox goad was a long, pointy stick. And if you were plowing your field, you would use some oxen, and you would have two of them yoked together. There would be a piece of wood attaching both of the ox. and the oxen, and you would be in the back steering those things, holding on, steering and pulling, whichever way you wanted to go. Well, sometimes the oxen would get stubborn. They wouldn't want to move. What do you do? I mean, you're just a guy. You can't beat up an oxen. What are you going to do? So they would use this pointy stick to poke the back of their legs. And then, woo, then the oxen were like, oh, that didn't feel good. Let me take off. Well, this guy, I don't know if he was a farmer, like this guy was bad news farmer, so I don't know. But he had an ox goad, and he killed 600 men of the Philistines. Now, I do not know if that was that all at once, and he just went around the battlefield, swinging his ox goad, or was that like, maybe he was like a ninja, and he went and killed 600, separate time. I don't know. But what we find out about him is that he was used by God to kill these Philistines, as it says at the end of verse 31, and he also delivered Israel. Now, it's safe to assume in verse 31 that the same cycle happened during Shamgar's time, that there was disobedience, and then there was discipline, and then Shamgar the deliverer, and he delivered Israel. This is going to continue to happen over and over and over again. And to be honest, the disobedience of the children of Israel is really no surprise. What is a surprise is that God, over and over and over again, rescued his people. That's the surprise. Not because we think, oh, God can't do it, or I'm surprised God could do that. No. But his mercy, man. Like, why does he just keep having mercy on his people? You would think he would just say, done with these fools, man. Let's get rid of them. I'm gonna start over with somebody else. But they continually disobey him. And he continually disciplines. But he continually delivers them. Why? Because he loves his people. It's a biblical principle. You and I will have seasons of, man, we're riding high, we're obedient to the Lord, man, things are going good. And then there will be seasons where we are disobedient to the Lord. What we learn from this is that God stays consistent. Does he discipline us? Yes, because he loves us. But his love doesn't stop. And while there may be times where he takes his hands off, it's not completely. He may take his hands off to allow us to experience the consequences of our sin, our disobedience. But that doesn't mean he deserts us. He uses that to discipline us and then delivers us. That is fantastic news. And that's what you and I want to remember as we go through the book of Judges. It's not about how wicked the people were. Yes, they were wicked. There's no surprise there. Please. What is surprising is God's mercy over and over and over again to this day. To this day. God is still being merciful to them. We want to make sure that we're learning from these past mistakes, from this disobedience. One of my favorite quotes is from Socrates. I read Socrates because I'm so smart. Just kidding. I love this quote though. Intelligent individuals learn from everything and everyone. Average people from their experiences. The stupid already have all the answers. We don't want to be stupid. We don't want to have that mindset of like, I don't need to hear it. I already know. Don't tell me. No. We want to learn from everything, everyone. And here's a quote from Christopher, St. Christopher. That's me. Wise people learn from other people's mistakes. So learn from your own mistakes, but also you want to notice everybody else's mistakes and go, you know what? I don't want to do that because they did that, and they got beat by their mom with a chancla. I don't want to do that. That's no good. Stop. So you want to pay attention to even other people's mistakes and go, oh, yeah, I need to not do that. We want to read the mistakes of the children of Israel and then go, yeah, disobedience. No, that's no good. I need to strive for holiness. I need to strive for obedience to the Lord. Father, thank you so much for your word. And